All right, everybody, buckle up, because this deep dive is going to take us way beyond your grandma's atlas. We're tackling Michel Foucault, the king of critical theory, and how he saw geography
Oh, yeah.
as this, like, hidden battleground for power and knowledge.
And you know what? Battleground is a really good word because he does not mess around. Right away, in questions on geography, Foucault's like, what even is geography anyway?
Right, he just throws down that gauntlet, makes you realize mountains and rivers are only half the story. It's how we humans carve up space, claim it, and yeah, sometimes use it to control each other that
Yeah,
he's really interested in.
totally. Like he'll take these words we use every day, territory, domain, field, and bam, suddenly they're not so innocent.
Yay.
They're loaded with this whole baggage of military conquest, economics, who's got the upper hand, you name it.
Makes you look at your property lines a little differently, doesn't it? But okay, so he's saying when we talk geography, we're actually talking power. How do we even uncover that history?
He calls it an archaeology of geography.
Okay, now I'm picturing us with those little brushes dusting off ancient maps.
Uh-huh. I wish.
What's he really getting at with that word?
Digging into ideas, you know? Like, how did we end up thinking about geography this way? Who decided what goes on the map, literally and figuratively? And who benefits from us seeing the world that way? It's getting at the power dynamics baked right into knowledge itself.
Sneaky, right. And speaking of sneaky, he uses that panopticon example to explain this. I vaguely remember it from college, but for those who didn't take architectural history.
Picture this. Circular prison, watchtower in the middle, guards see everything, prisoners, not so much.
Spooky.
They never know if they're being watched, so they police themselves.
Okay, creepy but effective. But how does this prison design connect to, like, our everyday lives? We're not all under constant surveillance, or are we?
That's what Foucault's getting at. The panopticon, it's not just a prison. It's a model for how power works in modern society. We've got cameras everywhere, online tracking, facial recognition. Makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, it's like how much are we shaping our behavior based on the potential of being watched, even if no one's looking right at this second?
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's powerful. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because he argues that knowledge science, research, even geography, it's not neutral either.
Oh, here we go.
It's shaped by whoever's in charge, used to keep that power structure going.
So it's not just about kings and queens anymore. It's about who gets to decide what counts as knowledge, what we study, what ends up on those maps we were talking about.
Bingo. Foucault wants us to ask, whose interest did those maps serve? Who got left out? Whose stories aren't being told?
It's like he's saying, show me your map, I'll show you your blind spots.
And you know, it's funny. Foucault himself kind of seems surprised anyone would even ask him about geography. Like in these excerpts, he's almost like, why is this interesting?
He's such a tease. But then he drops this bomb that his own work all along, it had this spatial thinking woven through it, even if he didn't always spell it out.
Right. Total Foucault move. Like, oh yeah, that. Power, knowledge, institutions, it's always had geography in the mix. No biggie.
So give us an example. Where was his work secretly all about that spatial thinking?
Think about his early stuff. The history of madness, prisons, how medicine evolved. That's all about how we define and control actual physical spaces.
Oh, I see it. Like when he was tracing how asylums developed historically, he was also looking at how those places literally divided the world into sane and insane.
Exactly. The layout of those buildings, the routines inside, who had power in that whole system, it all mattered. It's like these places become mini models for how we decide who belongs where, who's normal, who's locked up, who's free to walk around.
And then those spatial metaphors, inside, outside, center, periphery, they get stuck in our language or institutions, even if we don't realize it.
And that's why Foucault is still relevant. He gives us this toolkit for understanding power, not just the obvious forceful stuff, but the subtle ways it shapes how we think, act, even how we relate to the world around us, literally.
Like he's handing us a new pair of glasses and suddenly, bam, we see these power dynamics everywhere.
Exactly. And this is where maps become super important in his view.
Because a map is never just a map, is it? It's telling a story, usually from one point of view.
You know that saying, history is written by the victors?
Oh, yeah.
Foucault would be like, and they drew the maps too.
Yeah.
He was fascinated by how maps were used to prop up power, make colonialism seem okay, literally redraw the world to benefit the people in charge.
Makes you think about those old maps from Europe during colonialism. They always made places they were conquering look smaller, less important, easier to take over.
Exactly. Or even now, how we choose to map, say, Natural resources, certain groups of people, environmental risks. Those choices, they show who's got power, and they influence how we understand those issues.
It's like, what are those maps not showing? Whose voices are left out, silenced, erased in the process of making these things that look so objective?
And that is exactly the kind of thinking Foucault wants us to do. He's not saying to throw out all maps,
Hmm.
but to question everything. Who made this? Why? What's included? What's missing?
Be a more skeptical map reader.
Exactly. Look beyond the surface. You'll find layers of power, different perspectives.
So if all geography, like he's arguing, is intertwined with power, how do we use that? To challenge those structures, make things more equal, that's the million-dollar question, right? How do we actually do something with this?
It really is. And,
Hmm.
Foucault, he's not big on giving us like a 10-point plan,
Right.
but he does leave us with some tools to at least start figuring out how power works.
Okay, so where do we start? If even maps can be biased, knowledge isn't neutral, how do we use that to make things better?
I think step one is just realizing how deep this all goes.
Yeah.
Once you see how power is woven into maps, institutions, even the words we use to talk about where we are,
Yeah.
then you start to see those mechanisms, and then you can start to think about how to mess with them.
It's like that saying, gotta admit you have a problem before you can fix it, right? We have to admit these power imbalances exist, even in something like geography, which we think of as objective.
Exactly. And then we ask those tougher questions. Whose voices are missing from this map? Who's being left out? Whose interests are being served by this way of dividing up the world?
Like being a detective, but for maps.
Total.
Putting on our magnifying glasses, looking at each border, each label, each little bit of shading.
I love that. And it's not just about critiquing the old maps, it's about making new ones that show different perspectives, challenge the old ways of doing things, put the focus on people who've been ignored for too long.
So not ditching maps altogether, but using them to change things, right? Challenge the status quo, make power and knowledge more equal in different places for different people.
Absolutely. Geography, it's not this dead thing, it's alive, constantly being shaped by the choices people make. And we all have a say in making those choices more inclusive, more fair, more representative of the world we want to see.
Man, Foucault really makes you think, huh? Gives you a whole new way to look at things.
He does. But that's what's so great about his work. It's challenging, makes you uncomfortable, but ultimately, it's empowering. We're not just pawns in this game of power. We can question it, fight back, reshape it.
Like he's given us all a map and compass and said, go explore, find your own way, and build a better world while you're at it.
Beautifully put. I think we've given everyone a lot to chew on today.
We have. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Foucault's ideas about geography, power, knowledge, remember, next time you look at a map, don't just see lines, see the stories being told, the perspectives being shown, and yeah, the power dynamics, always those power dynamics. And then ask yourself, how can you use that knowledge to make a difference right where you are?
Happy exploring, everyone.